let's keep in mind where we are. We're using a strategic approach to try to educate ourselves. We're not looking at education as a collection of subject matter, that we reach into the bag and we pull something out and investigate that and so forth. We're trying to pattern the way in which we're investigating and keep consistent that approach. And that amounts to a methodology. And our methodology was to take books as the source of our education, but to take the largest view of what a book is, so as to include films, to include computers, to include art, many other aspects. By focusing on books, we gain a lot of tailwind in terms of the traditional orientation of civilization. Why is civilization important to us? It's not important to us as long as we're just natural. As long as we would live in nature, civilization is extraneous to us. Even on a tribal level, civilization is largely an intrusive outside experience, again, extraneous to our nature. We could have lived in many cultural varieties and never had to have this kind of education. Living in a culture, the necessary initiation would have been to ensure that our tribal life fit into nature. Whatever the natural cycle of the plants or animals wherever we lived, our tribe would have had to fit into that. The Laplanders have to fit into the cycle of the reindeer and became nomadic. The Pygmies in the Congo had to adjust to a severely limited diet dependent upon the forest, and so they had to learn to work together, and they had to learn to follow a cycle of harvest, not because the trees were nomadic, but because there was so little harvest in any given area that they had to learn to move their villages, but move it in such a way that they came back again. And so there are many versions. The Hopi Indians had to stay on those mesas. They could not be nomadic at all. And the life that they lived was based upon staying where you are, staying still. So there are all kinds of cultures, and they were dependent upon nature. In that whole level of humanity, there was no need for this education. This education to that level of human life would have seemed like science fiction, would have seemed surreal, alien, not at all necessary. But one of the qualities that came out of tribal life was the recognition that staying in participation with nature was not always possible, not always feasible. Even the animals occasionally would suffer depopulations and thus be out of the normal natural ecology. Even the plants occasionally would have some ravage like fire or disease. And so there were always some modifications, usually in a crisis period. But while nature poses occasional problems in crisis periods, the plants and animals themselves, on the tribal level, human beings found that they themselves would drift out of focus. And when they drifted out of focus, there would be a compensation that would occur. The lack of focus would be compensated by dreams. So that images, internal images, interior images, were the first indication to men and women that when you get out of sync with nature, an interior world opens up in compensation. And so eventually dreams had to be worked into tribal life. And as dreams were worked into tribal life, we have to understand what we're talking about. Not just dreams, because the idea of dreams, which we have, is so powerful that it obscures the basic simple reality about dreams. So we have to replace the word dreams with the word image. Dreams are images, moving pictures. So being out of sync with nature automatically primed the imagination of tribal men and women. And the whole emphasis was to somehow use the clues of the images as indications of coming back into sync with nature. Now, you can't grab images with your hand. You can't spear them. You can't net them. And so the equipment that was evolved to pull images back into sync with nature was mythology. Mythology was a tool that was used to bring images, to move them, so that they would come back into sync with nature. So that nature and myth go together optimally. They don't always go together, but they tend to want to go together. And we have seen from our education last year, because we spent 3 months investigating nature, and again we spent 3 months investigating myth, and we found that nature is, the best phrase we could find was a matrix of change. Nature is not statically a collection of things, but it's a process, or a whole series of processes, or to go even further, a whole ordering of series of processes, what we would call in mathematics today a matrix. Nature is a process, and so myth, because it's affine to nature, it has to modulate with nature. Myth is a process also. It's not statically there. It's not a static collection. And so it's deceiving for someone to talk about a collection of myths as if you had a collection of objects. That's a deceiving kind of way to talk about it. So that while nature is a matrix of change, myth is a matrix of images. And the general locus of that faculty within us that is both responsive to and generative of that matrix of images was called the imagination. And so the imagination of men and women on the tribal level, its total function was initially compensorial and two, was reintegrable. To let us know that something was out of sync with nature and to give us a clue as to how to pull it back into alignment. And so the whole nature of mythology is an imaginative matrix to find a kind of paralleling with nature. Now, in between nature and myth, we found that that level of activity is very objective, and it's traditionally called ritual. And we saw that ritual really means not stupid habit, but it refers to what we do, our actions, the actual actions, physical actions that we do. And we found that one very good arbiter of action is to focus our attention on the body. We can deepen that. We can say that ritual deals with the body, what the body does. And we can deepen that by saying that the body actually then is the indication of existence. So that ritual deals with existence. And that out of existence, because of this action, occasional spurs to the imagination over who knows how many millions of years, produced a quality that occurs in myth, that the imaginative resonance of the body, of existence, in myth, made of myth a pool of experience. And so in just this way, simple way, myth deals with experience, ritual deals with existence, and nature is its own self. And because it's a process and not objectively there, we cannot begin our numbering of steps with nature. And so we designate to nature, we took a cue from the way in which the binary code works, in which every logic computer system works. Nature, we gave it a 0, and ritual, we gave it a 1 quality. And we found that this was consistent with one of the most time-honored ancient systems, methodological systems of looking at life, at looking at what we're doing, the Chinese. That the Chinese assess nature as Tao and give it a 0 quality, an empty. Not that it's not there, not that it doesn't exist, but that it's like a place marker of space without content. It's like on a computer program, you set up a format for the screen, and whatever content comes in will go into that format, but the format itself does not record. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It means that you cannot count it as the first step, but you must count it as a 0 place. Now, how do we know that a 0 place is real? Because the whole development of mathematics is based upon the fact that a 0 place holds. You couldn't have higher mathematics without 0 holding its place as a mathematical function. And so the Chinese look at nature as Tao, as 0. And they look at Te, at action, as 1. And the whole definition of Te in Chinese I Ching or Taoist thought, Te is unity, uno-ness, oneness. And once you have 0 and 1, once you have nature and ritual, all the other expressions are capable of being developed out of that simple relationality. You can express anything in terms of a characterization of 0 and 1. This is known as a binary language. And the first European to ever understand this was Leibniz. The young Leibniz, seeing Jesuit translations of the I Ching in Amsterdam, in the little cramped apartment of Baruch Spinoza, was such a universal mathematical genius that he recognized right away that once you have a binary code, that mathematically you can describe anything as long as you could keep your sense of order of what you were saying. And all that computers do are keep a binary code in formed order. And we call that logic. And that truly is logic. Truly is logical. It has nothing to do with Socrates as a man. All men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. It has nothing to do. Understand? That's philosophy 1A glibness from the 1950s, a la American mediocre nothing. That's not logic. That's just a convenient way for people, the teachers, not to read Aristotle in the Greek and to tell their students, yeah, this is Aristotelian syllogism. You better learn it by Friday, right? You're not going to the senior prom. You don't know your syllogisms. And what was your response? It was the right response. Junk. This is junk. We're going to the prom. But we find, as we look at experience, that experience has a very interesting quality. Experience always tends to want to come together. It's like gravity. It wants to clump together. It wants to take images that fit together and wants to bring them together. Long way down the line, it's the puzzle-solving quality of human beings. Or not just any human beings. Any, on our planet, dolphins and chimpanzees also show that experience is integrable. They can also solve problems. Puzzle solving, problem solving is really all aspects of the integrative function of experience. But as function of integration happens in experience, it also deepens. It not only tends to want to come together, but it deepens. And so one gets a deep V, a deep chasm. And the more experience you have to come together, the more powerfully it comes together, the deeper the angle of the V goes. Emerson called that the angle of vision. And Emerson says, there's a moment in a person's life where they get the hackles up because they realize that their angle of vision has gone deep enough to come into contact with who they really are. That there is, in that interior realm of experience, a center, a poignancy, a presence, a soul if you like, a mind if you want, a deep self if you're into modern psychology, whatever it is, whatever you want to say. But it's an unmistakable awakening. It's like an alarm bell. It's like a, what the old image, the trumpet. You see what happens to the teacher gets excited. What happens is in experience, it's like the opposite of an intruder alarm. It's an alarm that there's no intruder, but that the real person's been contacted. Whoever it is that you really are has been touched. And once that happens, it only has to happen once. The body gets it. The body records that there's someone at home. Great. Now we can get something done. And so the body, all the cells in the body start sending their messages of what they need. They all start writing out requests to FEMA. We need this, we need that. And so all these messages come, and where do they come? They come to the interior world. Well, the only place that those envelopes, those bills can be opened and paid is at that deep point where the angle of vision contacted your real self. If you don't maintain that angle of vision so that it's deep enough that it just goes part way down, well, part way is the intermediate world of experience on the cultural tribal level, and it doesn't know the answers to cellular inquiries. It doesn't know what to do. And so it gets beleaguered by all this and says, we don't know what to do. And so the body gets sick because what can it do? It says, well, we'll show you what's wrong, right? How about a swollen tongue? How about bleary eyes? You like headaches for a couple of years? What do you need to get the fact that our complaints are real? So this warfare between an intermediate tribal self, which is like the ego, and the body is incessant because the ego doesn't know what to do about all those inquiries. It knows nothing about molecular biology, much less atomic physics. But that's the level at which nature in the body is sending those messages. It's saying that gene 90 on chromosome 40 has a bullshit attitude towards cell reproduction and is causing cancer. And the ego says, we'll hold a dance. We'll pound some drums. And the cells say, that's universal language. So that in a very odd way, the body and the soul go together. They understand each other. They not only see eye to eye, but the soul has the deep pockets, the cash, which can pay those debts of the body. So that the body yearns for this contact. We call that the desire for salvation. It's not just that. I'm not demeaning religion. But it puts it on a real footing. So that there is, in experience, at a certain level, once your angle of vision has touched yourself, all the quality of the body is to engender the kind of existence that will lead you more swiftly, more assuredly, or even forcefully to deepen that experience and get that angle of vision back down there. So at the whole level of myth has a kind of a function that becomes torrentially interested. It's almost like a compulsion, torrentially interested in getting back to that level. And that level we identify just generally as the mind. So that the interiorization of experience produces an inner world of the mind. And the mind is objectively real, just like the body. That's why the mind and the body get along. There's no mind-body problem. There's a body-ego problem. There's no, you see, subversive. There's no mind-body problem, but there's a mind-ego problem and a body-ego problem. In fact, if the mind and the body could get together, they would say, well, we have the same problem. The middleman. He's taking an energy cut from you, and he's discounting my integration symbols, because it's those symbols that are further compacting and integrating the imagery. And in just this way, mythology transforms into a symbolic structure. And that symbolic structure is also a matrix. And the matrix of the mind, that's Hollywood for just so. The matrix of the mind fits the matrix of nature so perfectly that in deep meditation, high samadhi, one experiences mind and nature as a ribbon of continuity. They fit together so well that the only thing that one can say in retrospect is it's a continuity. There wasn't any difference at all. And someone on the outside says, well, what was it like? And the answer is it was like nothing that you've done. Because if it were in your experience to have done this, you wouldn't ask such a question. Well, what happened? Well, nothing happened, and that was what was great. We didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to make any adjustments at all. Well, what's out there then? It's completely open. There are no glitches, there are no burrs, there are no sinkholes, and there are no roads. I mean, who needs roads there? to quote Back to the Future mad scientist Christopher Lloyd. Where you're going, you don't need roads. Don't worry about it. And so our whole first year was an investigation of the ecology of how nature, ritual, myth, and symbol happen. They happen. And that whole ecology was integration. The energy mode, the thread that kept all that together, was integration. But when integration reaches a completeness, it isn't like period, end of story, send into editor. It's not that at all. Because a tremendous spring of integration energy has been wound up. Even though one comes to calmness, it's a charged calmness. Even though one comes to a resolution, the resolution is energized. And all by itself, the symbolic structure of the mind will turn. The Greeks called it metanoia. It'll turn around in itself and open out. And what was wound up, sort of in a clockwise way, will unwind in a counterclockwise way. And so we needed a second year of our education to unwind what we had wound up. So at the end of this year, you'll be returned back to the doorstep of wherever you live. You remember the first assignment at the beginning of last year? From wherever you live, take a walk, which is different from taking a hike. Take a walk, and as you walk, just do it. And then we went from that random walk, we developed the whole first year of the education. And at the end of this year, like good tour guide, if you pay your bills, we'll take you back to your threshold and just let you off and say, you're home again. You went on a tremendous adventure, and for the rest of your lives, you'll be able to draw on that adventure. It may not seem at first that so much changed, but as you go on, you'll realize what a treasure trove of actuality is available to you. And you won't have to figure out ways to use it. It'll just be there. It'll happen. It's like being given fertile ground, and every time you plant something, it really grows. Instead of just coming up a little plant, it comes up flourishing. Whatever you do, your actions, your thoughts, your person, your cosmos, your total outlook, all will be fertile. And however you want to live it, you go right ahead. So where we are now is we're at the second lecture of the second year. And we saw that in order to have a convenient name, a word for the beginning of the second year, we're going to use vision. Vision. It's an English word that came into usage in Chaucer's day. The English word vision. It comes into play in Middle English in Chaucer's day, in the 14th century, which is one of the great mystic centuries of all time, the 1300s. One of Chaucer's other books, other than the Canterbury Tales, translated into Penguin Classic, is called Love Visions. The Love Visions of Geoffrey Chaucer. The author of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight wrote some visionary works. One of them is called Pearl. Another is called Purity. The 14th century was a century where people began to recognize that vision was very important, because vision had something to do with laying the fertile ground out of which the human person actually gains reality. That the human person is a very rare plant. And the human person does not grow out of nature. And the human person does not grow out of culture. The human person grows out of vision. And because this is such an amazing phenomenon, the traditional name in ancient times was not vision, but magic. The human person is the objectification of the magic level of this world. But we're going to use the term vision because vision is much more accurate. And we'll see that just as the body becomes objective in ritual, and just as the mind becomes objective in symbols, the person becomes objective not in vision, not in magic, but in art. And that the best thing that one can say is that the phrase, the art of person making, is a very accurate phrase. There is an art to person making. And you don't have to be a Rembrandt. All you have to be is the artist capable of making your own person. But to try to make your person out of a cultural stew is insufficient. It's a thankless task because there's no way to do it. Structurally, it cannot happen. And to just return yourself back to nature and try to make your person out of nature, it doesn't happen there. The person is precipitated out of vision. And it's almost like an alchemical process. Just like existence is precipitated out of nature. In a very strange way, if you could contemplate deeply enough, if you could pray intensely enough, if you could meditate clearly enough, one can actually see how mysteriously existence reigns. It's like a rain. Existence reigns out of nature, out of the matrix of change. Sometimes in the Vajrayana, it's called the gentle rain of bliss. And the collection of that rain is the ocean of existence. One can get very poetic. One can get beatific about it. What's important for us is to recognize that today is the second day in the beginning of the second year, and that the second year is all about unwinding, about taking the integration that we have wound up and letting it unwind as naturally as possible. Very often, letting something simply happen is the best way of learning what's going on, what can go on, what does go on. And so in vision, it's important for us to realize that we're no longer packing things together, but we're opening up presence. We're no longer integrating, but we're differentiating. And just to put it on a psychological level for a moment, nobody ever found themselves in integration. You have to differentiate in order to find yourself. That is to say, your person. In integration, you can find your soul. You can find your deep self, but you don't find your person. Because your person needs to live in this world and needs contact with other persons. The qualities that are there on the mythic, experiential, tribal level are raised to many, many powers on the personal level. Tribal people need to be together because of the threats of bandits, because of the threats of weather, Persons need to be together because it is basic reality of their structural nature. All beings who have acquired personhood recognize each other as kin on a universal level. So that a civilization is a very large powered version of a transformation of what was culture. It isn't that civilizations are large multinational cultures. That's not that at all. That's not what a civilization is. But a civilization is an interfaced matrix of persons. And as we saw, wherever the universe seems to objectify something for sure, it has a staying quality, has a stable quality. It's just like when the protons and the neutrons and the electrons come together in certain ratios. Those ratios are so stable that those clusters of particles become elements. Hydrogen is very stably hydrogen. One of the most stable elements in the whole periodic table is the lightest element in family 7A, which is fluorine. And you would, if you saw a fluorine as a kind of a lethal yellow gas, you would say, well, that can't be stable. Yes, it is. On the atomic reality, fluorine is one of the most stable elements there is, because it'll accept electrons from anything except 3 other elements: helium, argon, and neon. It'll join with any of the other elements. It's the most gregarious of all of the elements in a way. And that little minute quantities of fluorine produce fluorides, which are very good for making things real. A little fluoride in your toothpaste makes teeth very real. So you understand, once somebody knows how to set up a pattern of recognition for you, your responsibility is to open your eyes and go through that pattern in your own way. I can't choreograph how you do this course, but I guarantee you I have set up for you a wonderful tour, and if you just go through it in any way that you can, and just make sure that you do go through it in your own way, it'll have its effect. You don't have to overstudy. You don't have to get into that sort of thing at all. There are no exams. However you do it, whatever appeals to you will be immediately useful to you, and the rest of it will register on levels that will be accessible to you later on, whenever you need it. But we need some help, because we're using books as a kind of a touchstone, as a kind of a base. We're using books as a kind of a base. I get cramped by conditions of LA. You know, in old times, the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers used to use the dirt, the dust, and they would draw their diagrams in the dust with the finger, and then they would go like that, and then erase it. So, the guys down the street couldn't see what they were teaching, because there were thousands of these guys teaching, sophists. And one of the sophists got a radical idea. Instead of drawing in the dust with his finger, he drew in the students' minds with his words. And his name was Socrates. And he discovered that if you draw in the students' minds with words instead of your finger in the dust, they get the education rather than you getting the importance. I would rather you have your education than me having importance. I go to sleep at night, every night, completely content of being anonymous. Because I laugh myself to sleep, thinking how famous I'll be in the 28th century. So forget it. All I need is your contributions each week to pay my damn mortgage. If I can do that, the rest of it sucks. That's Hollywood for Let It Go. We're going to take a break in a few minutes, but let's look at this one point. In order to keep a bunch of pearls together, you have to have a string. And you can't just string the pearls together. After each pearl, you have to knot the string. What do they say in Caracas? Comprende? If you don't knot the string, they will slide. And so each time we go through an episode of experience, we want to knot the string. So we want to have a kind of a synthesizing thread that will take the knotting action but will not produce complications. All right? What's the foundation of the basic methodology of engendering the pearls as we go along? Books. So we need something affine to that, so we'll take a more important book, a book that we use for the whole year, and we'll make that the string, and we'll read sections of the book portioned out week by week, and that'll be our form of knotting by language in the mind, so that the weekly episodes will have their string and their knotting, and that we end up with a necklace. So each person is encouraged to choose a book which you're going to read throughout the year, and you're going to read it in 52 different stages, and each of those stages is the knotting of the string. You're going to take an overall text, which will be the unifying thread for the whole year of all the other books, and read just an episode each week, and that's tying the knot on it. Now, there are some books that are really made for this. If we can imagine, there are men and women who have understood what we're understanding today, have really understood that, have known this, have known integration, differentiation, all these processes, and have prepared exactly those kinds of books. There are not many of them, but there are enough of them. And so I choose 2 each year, and you can take your choice of 1 of 2 each year. The first year, the choice was between the Odyssey by Homer and Moby Dick by Herman Melville. The choice the second year is the Aeneid by Virgil or the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. The Canterbury Tales is like the Odyssey. It's a journey, an episodic journey that's held together by a feminine quality of acceptance of everything. Whereas the Aeneid, like Moby Dick, has this masculine quality of making sure that every opportunity to have conflict and combat is faced with a sword. When we come back from the break, we're going to take a look at the Aeneid. But the whole purpose is not to read the Aeneid because you're going to have a final exam on world literature or Roman literature, whatever it is. That's not it at all. It's simply a technique, a vehicle for our technique of self-education. And if we just get used to it, after a couple of weeks, it'll seem so natural. So the whole thing is not to read the Aeneid. That wouldn't be it at all. But I've portioned out the Aeneid. I've portioned out the Canterbury Tales. Just like last year, I did the Odyssey and Moby Dick for you, with readings of about 2 or 3 pages each week. And the caution to you, as your tour guide, don't read ahead, don't fall behind. The whole purpose of it is just simply to do a little bit each time. It's portioned out so that 2 minutes a day during the week will accomplish everything that you need to do. And you don't have to understand it. You're not going to be examined on it. It's just simply an activity to do it, right? It's a ritual comportment that has its own efficacy. And after a while, it's like having learned to type. You stop wondering where the F is and you just type it. What did they tell you when you... Well, they used to teach typing this way. I keep forgetting this is about 40 years ago. They used to play this music, right? And they would tell you, just keep typing. Forget your errors, just keep typing. Because it's the way babies learn to speak. They don't learn to speak because the mother keeps saying wrong grammar. They talk gibberish, right? And the mothers say, wow, gibberish, because they know this is good. You have to talk gibberish before you can talk anything else. And by the end of this course, you'll be good enough, you'll be able to con your way through anything in life. Let's take a break. I've showed you images of the Ara Pacis Augusti, the altar of the peace of Augustus in the Roman Forum. And we had this on the camera at the beginning. And then the central panel of the frieze of Tellus Mater, Mother Nature, giving of her bounteousness to her children. The temple itself was a square building in the very center of the Roman Forum, and all of the roads of the Roman Empire led to this temple. All of them. The Via Flaminia, the Via Appia, all of them. And the roads were like the arteries of the Roman Empire. And so all the arteries came to this heart, came to this doorway. And on the outside of this square building was a frieze, sculptures on the wall, of all the powerful people at the time that made the Roman Empire, and their wives and their children, and all of them were there, and they were all coming in the frieze, in sculpture, to enter this building. And inside the building, all of the really higher power people of the Roman Empire were there. Augustus Caesar, his wife Livia, his daughter, his friends, his generals, the architects of the buildings themselves, they were all there. Because on this scale of final power, what you want to show the gods is who has done this, who is to receive this power. And all of these people then in this frieze come into the temple, and they eternally are frozen there in that sculpture doing that. And as long as this lasts, the power of Rome lasts. It's an eternal setting. And what are they all coming to? They're all coming to Tellus Mater, Mother Nature, who's going to bestow her bounteousness. But this is very curious because the central feminine mythic archetype for Rome is not Mother Nature, but Aphrodite. But the Romans didn't call her by her Greek name, Aphrodite. They called her by her Latin name, which is Venus. Venus. And so Venus is the guardian spirit of the Roman people. The mythic power of love, oddly enough, is the guardian mythic archetype of the Roman people and the Roman Empire. In fact, one of Julius Caesar's points that he made, that he had a right to be dictator for life, was that his family, the Julian gens, were descended from Venus. And when he took over the head of Roman religion, when he became the Pontifex Maximus, he said, who else should be, if not the descendant of Venus? And he had no argument. No one argued with him on that point. But in order to make this building work, in order to make the Ara Pacis Augusti work, there had to be a language structure that reached out into the minds of people and knotted in the minds of people that this significance, this symbol, was what it was. And the language structure that reached out to the minds of the world at that time and knotted the idea of the Roman Empire was the Aeneid by Virgil. Its whole purpose was to do that. It was designed to do that. It was commissioned by Augustus Caesar. Now, he didn't mafioso like grab Virgil's toga and say, "You." They do it in a much more comprehensive way. Virgil was so pressured by the impossibility to write the Aeneid. It was an impossible task. The Aeneid should not have been able to be written. What Augustus said is that Greek civilization held together for 1,000 years because of Homer, because of Homer's epics. Indian civilization holds together because of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Many civilizations have epics that found the social power structures that register in the language-formed minds of people. And so Augustus said he wanted a Roman Iliad. He wanted an Iliad in Latin that would show that the Roman people were the superior people to the Greeks. So not only do you have to write one of the world's great works, and the only work that you could compare it to is Homer. It's only been done once. That was 1,000 years ago. You have to do it on time because we're building this building. We've got the politics going. We've got the generals in place. And we want it done by this date. And it has to prove that we're superior to the Greeks, so it has to be better than Homer. And where Homer's language comes out of the grassroots bones of the way in which language works, Virgil's Latin had to be sophisticated civilization language working on magic level. The language of the Iliad and the Odyssey is ritual, mythic language raised to fine art, but the language of the Aeneid is magic, symbolic language. Much harder to do. It's like Homer is a tightrope walker, and he's able to tightrope walk under the big top tent all the way across with just a bar. And then Augustus Caesar says to Virgil, you walk across because tightrope walking can be done, and he shows you the Grand Canyon. Here's the bar. There's the cord. We know it can be done. Do it. It was like that. It was impossible. So that Virgil never published it in his lifetime. In fact, he was wiser. He never finished it. He was always at work on it. Whenever he was asked, I'm working on it. And on his deathbed, he said to his closest friends, burn it. And unfortunately, nobody got up to do it. And he died, and there it was, so they published it. And what's unfinished about the Aeneid is not even worth quibbling about. But what happened was that Virgil realized, increasingly, as he brought it to a conclusion, the devastating effect that this was going to have. Because he had become successful in his genius, and he had done almost the impossible. He made a magic language epic. Not a mythic language epic, which is already strong enough, but a magic language epic that can be used by people that control its effect as a forceful power. A mythic language convinces you because of appeal. A magic language convinces you by compelling you. And the whole Roman Empire works. Excuse me, but the whole Roman Church works because language was raised to this magical level, this visionary level, this civilized level, and nodded. Why are we then using such a dangerous book as one of the two synthesizing threads? The other one is Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, totally different thing. Why are we using it? Because it's the perfect way to synthesize differentiation. And by using it to synthesize differentiation, we're immune to the compulsive effects because those compulsive effects occur on the integration level, in the integration mode. Let's not fool ourselves. Hundreds of millions of people have been compelled to doctrinaire mentalities throughout Western history in the Western world because of this book. It is much more powerful than any communist manifesto. Much, much, much. Marx was a third-rate philosopher working in the British Museum with a New York newspaper paycheck and wrote out a series of beefs. The Aeneid is like big wizard magic stuff on colossal world scale. Because it's not about convincing people, but about compelling minds. And all during the Middle Ages, Virgil was held as a necromancer. Both by the people that were afraid of what had happened because of the Aeneid, the people that suffered under centuries of the Roman Empire didn't want it to come back. But also on the part of people that were using that power in other ways and didn't want anyone investigating it. This is our stuff. And so there were almost no people that read the Aeneid in real fine understanding for about 500-600 years. And the first person to really read the Aeneid and understand Virgil in a tremendously important way was Dante. And so when Dante needed to have in his epic to make a civilization, to remake a civilization, to get out of this Roman Empire bind, the only way to get out of that kind of bind is to write your own magic epic to countermand it. And that's what the Divine Comedy was. And what better guide through that hell than the man who wrote the previous epic? And so Virgil became Dante's guide through hell. Dante's very wise. In the Aeneid, what's important to us is to read it with the distributed assignments. Because this way it knots after every week. It makes the knot so that you have a nice necklace at the end of the year. So those who choose the Aeneid, today is for you. Next week I'll go into the Canterbury Tales a little bit. Canterbury Tales totally different. Canterbury Tales is about the humane quality of dissolving episodic life into a vision of wholeness. And both the Aeneid and the Canterbury Tales involve a differential pilgrimage. The Canterbury Tales is a pilgrimage. The Canterbury Tales is a pilgrimage from London to Canterbury up on the coast. And the Aeneid is a pilgrimage from the ruins of Troy to Carthage, North Africa, to Italy, trying to find a place to found Rome. because the Romans identified themselves, the way they could become superior to the Greeks is that they were the braver warriors. They were the Trojans in the Trojan War, in the Iliad, the Greeks against the Trojans. They lost the war, but they were the braver warriors. That's what the Romans say. That's what the Aeneid says. How indelible is this? Here in Los Angeles, one of the major universities in the world, USC, call themselves the Trojans. To this hour. I'm telling you how powerful this is. You can't believe it. One of the odd things about the Roman mythological mind, and you have to recognize that the city of Rome was founded 753 BC. So that for 750 years there was already a Roman history before Virgil ever started. So how does he write about the reality and the formative nature of something that's been going on for 750 years? He reaches down the throat of history and grabs its intestines and pulls it inside out. He reaches into the mind of the Roman people and grabs hold of the very center of all of their functions and pulls it inside out. So one of the curious qualities of a real Roman power figure, the quality is that inside of them is nothing firm. Inside of them is what we would call, the English word is pathos. Pathos. On the outside, the Roman might produce a human being, usually a masculine figure who is terrifying in his standard brutality, but whose inside was a pathetic quality of insecurity. I used to have a photograph of a slide of one of the great Roman generals, Pompey. And from the outside, the physique of Pompey's face looked like a catastrophic, terrifying general. Even like a mature man would be, but you could see in the lines of the face that there's no way to win against this guy. But when you got closer and you looked into the expression in the eyes, what you saw was pathos. When Pompey died in Alexandria, they raised a monument to him. It was a single Roman column, massive, huge, but by itself, it didn't support a building or anything. There was nothing human there. It was just a massive column. It was the symbol of the man. Massively important, completely alienated. It didn't hold up anything except itself. The personality made by the Roman Empire is this kind of personality. And all of the derivatives of it, including a lot of what it passes as, quote, Western civilization, produces human beings that have a fantastic exterior and a pathetic interior. Like steel eggs, as soon as you break through, it's nothing but mush inside. The Greek word for that mush is miasma. It means an endless swamp of fetid, infested chaos. And of course, if you have that inside of that personality at the deepest core on the archetypal level, you don't want to get there. So when your Emersonian angle of vision touches that, instead of touching fantastic soul, it touches this hidden, fetid swamp. When Freud in Vienna first in analysis started to touch that, in patient after patient after patient, he got absolutely afraid of the whole thing. And so he went back to try and find some place to where he could find a language and a typology that would characterize what he was finding but not be dissolved and mushed in with it. And the stopping place that he got to, the only solid ground that he got to, was Sophocles. That's why they're called Oedipus complex or Electra complex. It's from Sophocles, Greek. He had to go back 400 years before Virgil in order to find enough solid ground psychically to be able to have a language that could type what was going on. Because all language structures in the brain has formations according to language. Yeah, the physiological structure of the brain is there because of language. On the brain, the center of Japanese language is much further down than the center of English language. The center of Chinese language is much farther over. A lot of the brain's structure, in terms of its functioning in neural net structures, is because of language. So the problem is not just false beliefs, it's much deeper than that. The problem is the structure of the brain itself has been characterized by the language that carried those beliefs. That's why there's no good done by trying to adjust yourself. That's like putting Band-Aids on gangrene. But the good news is that there is a way to restructure language itself, restructure the mind itself, and get cured. You don't need Band-Aids. It's just the resistances of the current. If you're around here long enough, you get used to it. Forget it. What was that Bill Murray said in Ghostbusters? It bothers them. All right, boys, it's Dr. Veckman. A language which cures is a magic language. You cannot cure a mythic bruise by a new myth. A new myth simply goes on top of the old one, and because the old one is spoiled, the new one becomes spoiled eventually. It's the rotten apple principle. Once a mythic image is injured or bruised, you have to redo it. You can't cover it up because eventually it infects what was used to cover it up. It's my old Sanjuro way of ignoring them. The whole issue then is that the differential process is a very interesting process. It is the process by which cures happen. Differentiation is the energy mode by which knots in the integration mode can not only be undone but redone. Now it becomes an interesting process. Our education is not just learning about stuff, but it's learning how to learn ways of learning that allows us to choose and design the way that we would like to be. Our real nature is free. We can be anything that we can imagine. On this planet, we can be anything that we imagine. But in the universe, we have much, much greater freedom than that. Because in the universe, we can be anything we can remember. It has a much larger scope. because there are a lot of things you couldn't even imagine, and you get surprised at how good they are. But our memories contain, in deepest angle of vision retrospect, the whole catalog of reality. So in the differential mode, in vision, what's important to us now is to recognize that we're getting a start. We're just shoving off. We're starting this journey. And one of the integrating threads is the Aeneid. Let me just talk for a minute about the Aeneid. Let me just present. Last week, the reading was lines 1 to 250. Just 250 lines. It was a couple of pages. And it was at the beginning of the Aeneid. And the Aeneid begins with the fall of Troy and its famous beginning lines, I sing of arms and of a man. So the Aeneid begins, he's singing of two things. He's singing about weapons and a man. So it's like this odd combination that right away, Virgil centers for us that the central synthesizing images, the synthesizing symbols of the whole image base of the Roman psyche was weapons in the hands of a man. Not tools, weapons. So that the whole nature of the Roman psyche is conflict, antagonism, warfare. And all of the virtues of the Roman personality were to build solidly so that you had a good foundation when it came to war. They made good roads, not so you could get to the resorts, but so the armies could get to the battles. Understand? They built really good buildings because we don't have time to come back and rebuild them. We're going to be out fighting, so build them good now. We want Roman law to be very basic and based then on an accumulation of precedent around a cluster of principles. We don't want to have any kind of debate about fine points. We want to have debate about how does this fit into what we know. And so the whole principle of legal precedent was established by Roman law. Not judgment in terms of wisdom, but judgment, how does this case fit into the other cases that have already been decided? So the whole legal system is a version of the Roman Empire. You begin to get the scope of what's going on, right? The entire legal system in the Western world is an extension of the Roman Empire mind. Just for starters. And that all political leaders are chosen out of that matrix tells you where we are in terms of civilization. We're in a feudal situation that's rapidly regressing back, and the last place that it was stable at all was back about the 17th century. And before that, the last stable place was the 13th century. So we'll either end up with religious wars of the 17th century or with crusades of the 13th century, unless things are changed. Don't worry, you don't have to go out and fight. They're much better warriors than us. In addition, there is a peculiar twist that's in the Roman psyche. On one hand, the patron goddess of the Romans is Venus, Aphrodite. That's not so bad, except when love is mishandled, it becomes lust. If love is put into a conflict-inviting milieu, it becomes lust. Let's make it even deeper than that. the only act of love in a conflict situation that is really enjoyable is rape. That's built into that mentality. It's a commonplace. It's the right of a soldier to rape. It's a commonplace. It never was in the mind, even as a commonplace, even it was an aberrant thing before that. Total. There are all kinds of things that are in this. All kinds of things. And one thing this education can do, at least, is alert you to the scale of misunderstanding that parades itself as a world. What is it really? It's a junkyard. We're forced to daydream about good times in a junkyard where we only have scraps to glue together. The good news is we don't have to stay here at all. We can walk out of the junkyard. There's plenty of facility. We can have real beaches and real sunshine almost any time. There's nothing wrong with this world that about 30 million people working together for 2 or 3 years can't just take it in hand. In the Roman psyche, not only is there Venus as the feminine archetype constellating the synthesis under these debilitating conflict situations, but the conflict situations are cinched together by a natural mythic image that the founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, twins, a pair, especially Romulus, but Romulus and Remus were orphans from the human race as babies, and they were suckled and raised by a wolf, a she-wolf. The Latin name for wolf is lupus. One of the things about Roman society is that they celebrate the Lupercalia. It's a festival about this wolf origins of the Roman people. When one got into the real fine points of the mythology by Virgil's time, there were people who could get into it. It was not so much that Romulus was suckled by a wolf, but that a wolf skin was given, delighting in the red-brown skin of a wolf nurse. Virgil's picturesque way of saying that Romulus was reared by a wolf. It upset early critics, gravely suggesting that the wolf bequeathed her skin to Romulus, that Romulus wore a wolf skin. In Virgil's imagination, the foster mother to whom he owed his life was this wolf. Romulus was not only proud of his Tegmen, but of the Gens under his rule and of the city that he was to found. This is from a commentary. There are standard commentaries on the Aeneid. This is a standard commentary on Book 1 of the Aeneid, where we are, Oxford University Press. Let's get this straight. The synthesizing archetypal symbol in the Roman psyche had something to do with Aphrodite, but Aphrodite put into a lust, even rape quality, and that whole thing was cinched. It's like a linchpin that goes in and holds that by a wolf mother characteristic. Now, there are two qualities about a wolf. One of the rare qualities is the lone wolf. And the lone wolf usually goes off by themselves. And there's that kind of quality through the Roman psyche. And it leads in the modern world to a lot of alienation. individuals just simply accepting alienation and just going off by themselves. Lone wolf quality. But the complement to that is that wolves hunt in packs. They come together to hunt together. And gangs are hunting packs, urban hunting packs. In fact, a lot of corporations are urban hunting packs. Believe me, it's like that. That whole quality, that's an indispensable psychological necessity to survive, is guaranteed as a part of that whole mentality. So that once you have bought into that, and believe me, it's not a question of buying into it, right? This is a magic spell compelling you. The only way out of that is to first wake up out of the spell, and then be able to find some guide to get out of that, and then be able to get together with other people to do something about it. And what are they going to do about it? They're going to have some kind of magic language that countermand. It's a huge ecology of problems. Fortunately, they're all solved. All of them. What we're learning here at the beginning of vision is that in the differential mode, vision involves consciousness. You can't have differentiation without, in fact, consciousness is that matrix that comes out of it. What did we say last time? Nature is a matrix of change. Consciousness is a matrix of consonance. Consonance. When we come to the Aeneid, we come to this coming week's readings of the Aeneid. Two people talk here especially. One, Aeneas talks, and two, Venus talks. Just a few of the words of Aeneas, and then just a few of the words of Venus. Aeneas talks to his fellow soldiers, the hunting pack, who are hunting for a new place to set up their den. Right? Wherever we set up our den, then from there we'll take over the territory. He says, O comrades, surely we're not ignorant of earlier disasters. We who have suffered things heavier than this, our God will give an end to this as well. Let's toughen up. Let's stay together. Let's prepare to fight together, to win, and we'll get through. Here's what Venus says to the Council of Gods on the mythic level. O you who with eternal rule command and govern the events of gods and men and terrify them with your thunderbolt, what great offense has my Aeneas given? What is his crime? What have the Trojans done that, having undergone so many deaths, the circle of all lands is shut against them, and just because of Italy, surely you have sworn that out of them, in time to come, with returning years, the Romans will be born. And from the resurrected blood of Teucer, one of the Trojan warrior kings, and from the resurrected blood of Teucer, rise up as rulers over all land and sea. In other words, already implanted here is the idea that the future, all of the future, forever, belongs to the Roman Psyche. Because after all those deaths and travails, out of a resurrected leader, one will just simply conquer all. Rise up as rulers over all land and sea. So this quality, Aeneas and Venus, right away in Book 1, lines 275 to about 280 and 320 to about 325, right away near the beginning of the Aeneid, you have this meeting together in the Aeneid that the destiny of the warriors fits in with their divine destiny. In a way, the Roman religious psyche had already done this in terms of archetypal psychology in themselves. Because the chief god that goes along with Aphrodite, that the Romans utilized, the masculine complement to Aphrodite, in Greek is called Ares, in Latin is called Mars. So that in the Roman psyche, in the Aeneid, Venus and Mars, the god of war and the goddess of the power of attraction, the compulsive power of attraction, are joined together. So that the compulsive desire that holds things together and the compulsive power to dominate are bled into each other, welded into each other. So that the Roman psyche was not ever able to differentiate between those two ever again. After the Aeneid, the Roman psyche never differentiates between those two. They're always together. It's a very peculiar kind of quality. And for instance, in the late High Renaissance, when there were people who were waking up from this long nightmare, you see a painting, say, like Botticelli did this beautiful painting of Venus and Mars, and Mars is sleeping. And Venus, because Mars is sleeping, finally, after all these centuries, that aspect is asleep. Venus has a curious expression on her face. The expression is, what am I doing with this man? What? How is it that I'm here? And it's like in the High Renaissance art, it's like Botticelli giving us a symbolic image for the first time of human beings psychically waking up and coming out of the swamp water and wondering, what the hell? But for the Roman psyche, this was just being made at this time. Virgil died 19 BC. Augustus became universal emperor of the Roman Empire in 19 BC. In other words, Virgil wasn't going to be able to polish it anymore. He couldn't wait. So he took the Aeneid and the Ara Patres Augusta and put them together and said, this is how it's going to be. And he just simply held it together. He lived for 44 years after that. He was just uncontested universal master for almost half a century. That's how the Roman Empire began. That's what's going on here. Now, completely different from this is Chaucer. Completely different from this is Chaucer. The Canterbury Tales is about a pilgrimage of a bunch of just ordinary people. And the people are selected by what they do. One person is a baker, one person is a priest, one person is just different functions. And they're all riding to Canterbury together, and because they want to pass the time, they decide that among them, each person will tell a pair of stories. The original design was to have a pair of stories because Chaucer's very wise. He only had enough time to write one story each for a number of them. But the original design was, as we go along, everybody will tell a pair of stories, and by the time we get there, we'll all get to know each other in a very interesting way, and it'll be a great journey. A fair field full of folk. That's what Chaucer's interested in. He isn't interested in building an empire. He's interested in bringing forth human character. Chaucer is all about what is really interesting is the character of human persons. That human persons are so incredible that they have gone through this amazing journey themselves in order to become who they really are. Let's find out. who each other are. How is our time? We have a few minutes? The tape can just go by itself. Next week we'll talk about Chaucer. We'll talk about the Canterbury Tales. If you choose the Aeneid, start reading. If you choose the Canterbury Tales, also I have laid out a page for the differentiation. The two texts that we have for this month are this single page of Zarathustra, which is free, and this rundown of the first Hermetic Treatise, and I have to charge $2 for this, and it's down below. These are our two texts, and we'll bring them into play next week. Now, each week, I write out a page or two, or sometimes three, of structural notes to myself. And I almost never use these in the lecture. But I use these to style my mind in order to give a spontaneous lecture. All of the notes from last year, I think there's 75 pages worth, I put into a pamphlet. And I'm going to have to charge $15 for those. And they have to be prepaid because I have to go to a printer, and it costs a lot to get this done, actually. So there's a list and a sample of what you would get down below for that. These notes are not notes to you for your work, but they're notes to me for my work. And I've been trained to be absolutely, completely open. That's why I teach in my house. So that you have the right to look with any eyes that you want at me in any way that you want to. Because there are lots of points along this education that suddenly it occurs to you that this is this true? This is really important, and you want to know, and you want to be able to have the freedom to have the certainty that what I'm doing is real. And so you have to be able to check on me. And so I make my notes to myself available to you also, so that you can see that there are no strings. Because after a while, it seems, well, how can this possibly be? If this were real, then you would be famous, right? Well, in the 28th century, I'm very famous.